Your posters suck because you're lazy. Now, if you're interested in the one sentence version of this video, that's it. You can stop watching now. However, if you'd like to understand why and what to do about it, keep watching. In 99% of bad poster design, there is a fundamental and deceptively simple problem. The designer is being both intellectually and formally lazy. Now, we can think of laziness as a quote-unquote unwillingness to work or to use energy. The root cause of this laziness in design is a desire on the part of the designer for the poster to make the desired perceptual magic on its own, by itself. Your lack of willingness to expend sufficient energy lies at the root of the problem. The construction of specific and unusual image spaces is hard. Now, I'm going to explain the importance of the categories of specific and unusual, and how and why they're the result of effort, work, thoroughness, and of course, energy. I'm also going to explain the most likely reasons why you're making these mistakes, what the categories of specific and unusual are in regards to image spaces, and how, importantly, to construct them. Now, if you stay to the end of this video, I'm going to explain that there is a very important and paradoxical exception to all of the issues that I raise in this video. But first, let's simplify a few of the important ideas. So in many of the videos on this channel, I try to provide clear guidance for the developing artist. Now, the most important activity of teaching, to my mind, is to take complex and nuanced ideas and to simplify their profile while exaggerating significant features. The goal behind the dual processes of simplification and exaggeration is to make complex and difficult ideas easy to understand. Effective teachers provide maps, simplifying the infinite detail of real terrain into a comprehensible and simplified schematic. Now, when we look closely at the physical terrain rather than the map, we can see an infinite level of detail. The real street, as opposed to the map, has street signs and shops and buildings and people and bubble gum on the sidewalk, while the map itself is an intentional and dramatic simplification of the territory. Now, in order to learn effectively, it's important to understand the basic shape of an idea first, and then to work towards the detail, not the other way around. Now, with all of this in mind, let's take an in-depth look at the fundamental reason your posters don't work. The confused designer stares blankly at their pasteboard, wondering why the poster they've designed has no life, lacks the capacity to move the viewer, and feels dead. The confused designer is lost in a morass of infinite possible solutions to the problem. They're lost in the aforementioned bubblegum on the sidewalk. They've lost the map. The root cause of the problem is dead simple and is fueled by the antagonist of our episode, laziness. Your poster is no good because the image space you've constructed lacks two things: specificity and the unusual, the not usual. Now, transportative image spaces, images that move the viewer, are not general in nature. They're highly specific images. Highly specific image spaces are unusual in some way. They're not usual. Now, why is this important? We need to turn our attention to the idea of patterns, Gestalt psychology, and taste in order to understand why, how, and in what ways specific and unusual imagery works, and more importantly, how to construct this type of imagery. The human mind is hardwired to detect patterns in absolutely everything. Our capacity for pattern detection is tied to our survival as a species. In pattern recognition, the human animal is hardwired for something called anomaly detection. The human brain's default mode network, the mental processes that are running in the background, are always asking, do I see a pattern? And which of the elements in the pattern deviates from the canonical set? This function of human pattern recognition and anomaly detection is an extremely important mechanic of art, and I'm going to explain why. Human beings understand fields like painting, design, and fashion as a pattern with a canonical set. The canonical set makes up what we consider good art, good design, good music, or good fashion. Now, every human being has a different canonical set, those items they recognize as good. My mom, as an example, has a different canonical set than Picasso, who had a different canonical set than you, and on and on and on. We can think of the canonical set in some ways as the idea of taste. In some ways, all of our canonical sets overlap, and in some ways, each person's canonical set is very different. So the canonical set we can think of as your taste. Now, who has good taste, who has bad taste, and even what taste means can be somewhat problematic. But pattern recognition lies at the heart of the reason why we should want to construct both specific and unusual image spaces. We construct specific image spaces and unusual image spaces in two ways: through the choices we make and by construction. When constructing images, we have the ability to choose things that are not usual. When a designer makes a choice that deviates from the established features of the pattern, from the canonical set, they have chosen something unusual. They have chosen something not usual. They've interjected anomalous features into the set. Now, because human survival has been tied to pattern recognition, anomalous features command attention. The human cognitive default mode network, that thing that's always running in the background, is a background process and is always asking which of these is not like the other. The thing that deviates from the canonical set stands out from the pattern, from the background noise. Now, I'm going to oversimplify this for a second and possibly do violence to the idea for the sake of clarity. But as an example, the designer Massimo Vignelli was famous for saying there are only 5 typefaces a designer will ever need: Futura, Times New Roman, Helvetica, Bodoni, and Century. For a moment in the 1970s and into the 1980s, the canonical set and the pattern for sophisticated graphic designers included more or less only these typefaces. Now, in that context, when nearly all proper designers chose one of these 5 typefaces, if we were to choose Moth or Parallax, we chose something that deviated from the canonical set, something not usual, something unusual. We've interjected an anomalous feature into the pattern. Now, there are 2 points here. First, anomalous features command attention, and second, an intelligent choice to deviate from the pattern is easy. It's easy to choose anomalous features that deviate from the pattern. The second way we can construct specific images is through building. Construction is by far the more difficult challenge and requires considerably more effort over time. It's through the construction phase of making your poster that most often laziness destroys your work. Now, when a designer or artist constructs an image from raw materials from the ground up, from the simplest basic unit, at the atomistic level, they're forced to make a nearly infinite number of idiosyncratic decisions along the path of construction. Now, this almost inescapably makes specific imagery. Now, another oversimplified example is if rather than purchase an image, if we create our images, and while doing so, we choose an unusual subject matter for our image, the image is specific and not usual or unusual. So consequently, when the human pattern recognition system looks at the poster, the perceptual system will say, this item, this poster deviates from the canonical pattern. And the act of construction from perceptual raw materials will command attention. The viewer will then try to match this new image to those things they understand to be part of the canonical set, those things that they understand as good art or good design. They'll try to match the new image to the things that they understand as good art or good design. Their default mode network will try to calculate to what degree does this anomaly in the pattern match the canonical set. And the viewer will ask themselves if the process of determining the new item's relationship to the given field is either rewarding or frustrating. And in most instances, if the new item deviates from the canonical set in some, but not all, substantive ways, and the new item is rewarding rather than frustrating, the new item will be understood by the individual as quote-unquote creative and quote-unquote good. So what's the rub? What's the problem? The fundamental problem is that the construction of specific imagery requires effort, both intellectual and physical. It is far easier to use default typography, stock imagery, and an understood color palette, etc. And it takes real effort to build an image space from the level of the simple simplest divisible unit from the atomistic level. This raises the larger question. What's the most effective way to become an excellent designer? Now, if you're interested in this question, I made a video addressing the issue. It's linked on the end screen of this video. I'm now going to explain this process with an example from my own work, and I can't underscore the following point more strenuously. My point in showing this work is not that all good design work looks like mine. My point is to give one specific concrete example of how to create specific and unusual imagery. My point also is not that your work should look like mine. My work should look like mine, and your work should look like yours. This is an example of the atomistic approach to image creation. The letter forms are hand-drawn, the language crafted. Everything in the image space is built from the smallest possible element. The net result is an image that is an accretion, a layering of highly specific image upon highly specific image, upon highly specific language, upon highly specific typography. So here we find another example where the aesthetic decisions build upon one another to create a specific and not usual image. Here is one last example. Now, by contrast, in the overwhelming majority of posters that suck, we effectively find this. Now, why am I not showing examples of what I believe to be bad poster design? Quite frankly, because I'm trying to be a better human being and I'm trying to be nice. And finally, I mentioned that there is an important exception to the idea that your posters suck because you're lazy. As with all things in art and design, the most fundamental truths contain within them a paradox. What is that paradox? Well, as an example, this image is drawn very directly, simply, with very little effort. Is it possible to create a compelling poster that is simple and direct? And can we find numerous examples that prove this point? Well, of course we can. Well, why is this so? Because as with all forms of artistic discipline, once the artist, through relentless dedication to their craft over time, has brought form, technique, craft, and idea under their control, there is absolutely zero correlation on the deepest level between time and quality. Think of a musician who has spent years dedicated to the craft of their instrument, lost in the moment of effortlessly touching the human soul through the power of music. Unfortunately, far too many artists and designers want to short circuit this process. Your posters suck because you're lazy. A special note for millennials, I'm using incendiary language suggesting that you are lazy in order to make a larger point. Okay, in order to make a larger point. My ultimate goal is actually to be supportive. I'm making these videos at least in part to be supportive, and I know that the concept of tough love is quote unquote problematic.